Say something, Ethan, Derek Walsh said, grinning across the cafeteria while his arms stayed locked around my girlfriend's waist. Your girl picked me. The whole senior lunch period went quiet, trays stopped moving, phones came up. Audrey Hart stood beside him in her white sweater, her lips pressed together, her eyes wet enough to look innocent but dry enough to stay pretty. Derek lifted her wrist and shook the silver bracelet I had given her last Christmas, then he pulled it off and tossed it across the table. It hit my lunch tray and landed in a smear of ketchup. Derek laughed loudly. There, take your little promise bracelet back. Audrey upgraded. The football table roared. Someone shouted, fight him, Ethan. Another voice yelled, don't let him steal your girl like that. Audrey looked at me like she expected the old scene to repeat. In my last life, I had jumped across this exact table. I had hit Derek first. He had hit me back. Trays had flipped. A teacher had gone down. Trying to stop us, Derek's father had called the school board before the blood on my lip dried. Audrey had cried in the office and said I scared her. Mr. Grant had called me unstable. My graduation was held pending review. My scholarship committee asked for an explanation. Derek walked at graduation. Audrey walked beside him. I watched the ceremony later from a phone screen with my name ruined in the comments. This time, I picked up the bracelet with 2 fingers, wiped ketchup off the silver heart, and placed it on the tray. I looked at Audrey first, then Derek. I said calmly, wish you happiness. The cafeteria froze harder than it had during the insult. Derek's grin twitched. Audrey blinked. Mike Reynolds, sitting beside me, slowly lowered his fork and whispered, that was not on my bingo card. Derek leaned forward. Derek said, that's it. No punch, no begging, no speech about love. I picked up my backpack. I said, no. Audrey's face changed. She looked offended, like my silence had insulted her more than any shouting could. Audrey said softly, Ethan, don't act cold. You knew we were having problems. I turned back. I said, now they're solved. A few students laughed. Derek's jaw tightened. He wanted rage. He wanted cameras. Chaos. A heroic bully moment. I gave him a clean floor and an empty stage. Derek stood. Derek said, you're really walking away. I lifted the bracelet once. I said, I'm taking back what's mine. You can keep what chose you. The cafeteria erupted. Not applause. Not yet. Shock. Laughter. Whispers. Phones typing. Audrey stepped forward. Audrey said, that's cruel. I looked at her. I said, no, cruel was letting him throw my gift into ketchup while you watched. Mike stood up beside me and grabbed his tray. Mike said loudly, for the record, ketchup deserves better. Derek shoved his chair back. Derek snapped, you think you're better than me, Miller. I walked toward the exit. I said, no, I think I'm done being worse for you. Mike followed me out, still holding his tray. In the hallway, he grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. Mike said, are you sick? Did you hit your head? Did you just achieve emotional enlightenment in front of Meatloaf? I opened my locker and pulled out my calculus folder. I said, I'm done fighting for people who hand knives to the crowd. Mike stared at me for 3 seconds. Then he grinned. Mike said, good, because Derek looked robbed, like you stole his favorite explosion. Behind us, the cafeteria doors opened. Audrey came out fast. Derek followed slower, with his crew behind him. Audrey called, Ethan. I shut my locker. I said, yes. She stopped a few feet away. Students filled the hallway behind her. Audrey said quietly, can we talk? I said, you already made the announcement. Her cheeks flushed. Audrey said, I didn't want it to happen like that. I looked at Derek. I said, then you picked a man who did. Derek smirked. Derek said, you can stop pretending. You're dying inside. Mike lifted his phone. Mike said, he looks alive to me. Derek stepped toward him. Mike said, cameras on. Try public assault before dessert. Derek stopped. Audrey looked from Mike's phone to my face. Audrey said, you're not even going to ask why. I said, no. Her voice sharpened. Audrey snapped, that's it. 2 years together and you don't care. I opened my folder and removed a stack of her college essay drafts. Red marks, my comments, my rewrites. My late night work. I held them out. Audrey stared. I said, take these. From today, write your own applications, solve your own practice tests, and ask Derek to review your scholarship essays. Derek laughed. Easy. I looked at him. I said, great. Her Stanford supplement is due Friday. Derek's smile weakened. Audrey took the papers slowly. I said, good luck. Then I walked to class while the hallway watched her stand there with the work I had been doing for her. By the end of the day, the school had already rewritten the story. Derek stole Audrey, Ethan folded, Ethan was a coward, Ethan was mature, Ethan was heartbroken, Ethan was cold. Every version had a little truth and a lot of noise. The senior forum ran 7 threads before dinner. One poll asked, did Ethan take the L or dodge a bullet? Mike voted bullet from 12 different accounts and told me it was democracy. Audrey posted a soft picture of her hand in Derek's, no caption, just a broken heart emoji and a new beginning song. Derek reposted it with, real men don't beg. Mike showed me while we sat at my kitchen table doing practice problems. Mike said, he says real men don't beg. He begged coach for extra credit after failing biology. Mom walked past with laundry and said, Mike, don't say things online you can't defend. Mike said, Mrs. Miller, I can defend that with screenshots. Mom looked at me. Mom said, you okay? I wrote the next answer on my paper. I said, yes, ma'am. Dad came in from the driveway, wiping grease off his hands. Dad said, that the girl who kept needing rides and essays. I said, yes, sir. Dad nodded. Dad said, then your gas bill just improved. Mike pointed his pencil at Dad. Mike said, Mr. Miller sees the economics. The next morning, Audrey waited near my locker with a coffee in one hand and her old soft smile back on her face. Derek was not with her. That mattered. She held out the coffee. Audrey said, peace offering. I looked at the cup. I said, no, thanks. Audrey lowered it slowly. Audrey said, Ethan, yesterday got ugly. I opened my locker. I said, Derek made it ugly. You stood beside him. Audrey stepped closer. Audrey said, I was confused. He pressured me. I put my books into my backpack. I said, then be less available to pressure. Her mouth tightened. Audrey said, you don't have to punish me. I turned. I'm not punishing you. I'm stopping. She looked down the hall, checking who could hear. Audrey whispered, can you still look over my Stanford supplement? Just this once. I'm asking as a friend. I laughed once, not loud, not kind. Audrey flinched. I said, Derek said easy. Audrey's face flushed. Audrey said, he doesn't know my writing style. I said, neither do you. A sophomore nearby choked on his drink. Audrey's eyes hardened. Audrey said, you're enjoying this. I closed my locker. I said, no, I'm saving time. Derek appeared at the end of the hall with 2 football players. Audrey straightened instantly. Derek saw the coffee in her hand and smirked. Derek called out, what's this? Visiting the ex already? Audrey said quickly, I was returning his notes. I held up my empty hands. I said, she was asking me to write her supplement. Derek's crew reacted with low laughs. Audrey stared at me like I had slapped her. Derek's face tightened too, because now the joke landed on him. Derek said, she doesn't need you. I said, then we agree. Mike arrived behind me with a granola bar. Mike said, historic moment. 2 enemies united by facts. Derek stepped forward. Derek said, keep talking, Reynolds. Mike lifted his phone. Mike said, keep threatening, scholarship boy. Derek looked at the camera and stopped. Audrey whispered, you didn't have to embarrass me. I said, you asked me in public. She said, no, I didn't. I pointed to the hallway camera above us. I said, then the camera will comfort you. Derek grabbed Audrey's hand. Derek said, come on. He pulled her away harder than he needed to. She stumbled once and looked back. I did not follow. The first crack in Audrey's new life appeared Friday afternoon. Stanford supplement deadline. She turned in something under her own name for the first time in months. At 3:10, she came out of Mr. Grant's office pale and furious. Mike and I were outside the library printing my engineering project logs. Mr. Grant followed her into the hallway, lowering his voice. Mr. Grant said, Audrey, the essay is not at your usual level, I'm telling you. Before submission because I don't want you hurt by a weak draft. Audrey said sharply, it's my voice. Mr. Grant sighed, it is less focused. I kept my eyes on the printer. Mike did not. Mike leaned over and whispered loudly, less focused means Ethan didn't write it. Audrey heard him. She spun. Audrey snapped, you're obsessed with me. Mike pointed at himself. Me, I'm here for printer paper. Derek walked up behind her. Derek said, problem. Audrey shoved the essay into her folder. Audrey said, no, Mr. Grant looked at Derek and softened his face. Mr. Grant said, Derek, your father confirmed the booster dinner for next week. Thank him for me. Derek smiled at me. Derek said, connections matter. I collected my project logs from the printer. I said, so does competence. Derek's smile turned sharp. Derek said, say that again. I handed Mike half the pages. I said, competence. It means doing things yourself. A few students near the library doors laughed. Audrey snapped, Ethan, stop acting like you built my future. I turned to her. I said, then stand on it without me. The line went quiet. Audrey's face flushed. She walked away before Derek could turn it into another scene. That night, the senior forum posted a screenshot of Audrey's old, study tips thread. Somebody had compared her polished posts from earlier in the year to her new essay excerpt she had accidentally left open on a library computer. The difference was brutal. The comments did the rest. Who was writing before? Ethan's ghost left the chat. Derek better learn grammar fast. Audrey blamed me in a private message. Audrey wrote, you humiliated me again. I replied once, stop using public lies and calling the mirror cruel. Then I blocked her. Mike printed that reply and taped it inside his locker like scripture. Derek lasted 3 days before trying to make me hit him. Monday after practice, he and 2 teammates waited outside the side gym exit. I had stayed late with MS Harper to review scholarship forms. Mike walked beside me because he said Derek had ambush posture. The hallway was empty except for the security camera above the exit sign. Derek stepped in front of me. Derek said, you talk big around teachers. I stopped 8 feet away. Mike angled his phone low. Derek saw it and smiled. Derek said, recording again. Scared, I said. Prepared. One teammate blocked the left side. The other blocked the right. Derek stepped close enough that I could smell mint gum. Derek said, you think letting Audrey go made you noble? She got bored because you're a broke little homework machine. I said, then she made a great choice. Derek's jaw flexed. He had expected pain. I gave agreement. He tried again. Derek said, she laughed about you, you know, said kissing you felt like kissing a calculator. Mike muttered, still more useful than you. Derek shoved Mike's shoulder. Mike rocked back, but kept the phone up. I said loudly, do not touch him. Derek turned on me. Derek said, make me stop. I looked at the camera above the exit. I said, no. He shoved me with both hands. My back hit the door. The crash echoed down the hall. I kept my hands open. I said, Derek Walsh just shoved me outside the gym. He shoved again. Mike shouted. Camera caught it. The side door opened behind me. Coach Daniel stepped out. Whistle around his neck. Coach barked. Walsh. Derek froze. Coach looked at Mike's phone, then at the hallway camera, then at Derek's hands. Coach said, office, now. Derek said, he provoked me. I said, by agreeing with you. Mike said, a devastating tactic. The coach pointed down the hall. Now. Derek's teammates disappeared so fast their sneakers squeaked. In the office, Derek claimed I had insulted Audrey. I said I had wished them happiness. Mike played his video. The hallway camera showed the shove. Coach Daniels looked like someone had stepped on his season. Principal Marsh rubbed her forehead. Principal Marsh said, Derek, you are already under warning for harassment. Derek said, he's messing with my relationship. I said, I left the relationship. Mike added, very politely, historic politeness. Principal Marsh said, Mike, shut up. Derek received a 3-day suspension from athletic practice and a conduct note pending review. His father called within 12 minutes. Principal Marsh took the call in her office, but her glass wall did not hide her face. When she came out, she looked tired and firmer. Principal Marsh said, Ethan, Mike, you may go. Derek glared as we left. Mike whispered, he wanted a fight and got paperwork. I said, paperwork lasts longer. Audrey came to my car after Derek's suspension. It was raining lightly, and she had no umbrella. In the old life, would have rushed to cover her with my jacket. This time, I unlocked my door and kept my backpack between us. Audrey said, Derek is furious. I said, then stand farther away from him. She hugged herself. Audrey said, you could tell the office you don't want him punished. I looked at her. I said, he shoved me. Audrey said, because you keep humiliating us. I put my backpack in the passenger seat. I said, he humiliates himself. You keep standing close enough to get splashed. She stepped closer to the car. Audrey said, you changed overnight. I said, you announced a new boyfriend at lunch. Audrey flinched. Audrey said, I wanted you to fight for me. I closed the car door slowly and turned to her. I said, You wanted me to fight him, get punished, and prove you were worth damage. She looked down, rain collected in her hair. Audrey whispered, maybe I wanted to know you cared. I said, you could have asked like a person. Her eyes filled. Audrey said, Derek is not like you. I said, you said he was an upgrade. She shook her head. Audrey said, he says things when he's angry. I said, he says things when people are listening too. She wiped her cheek. Audrey said, can we just talk somewhere? I opened the driver's door. I said, no. Audrey grabbed the door edge. Audrey said, Ethan, please, I need help with the Common App Activities section. Grant said mine looks inconsistent. I stared at her hand on my door until she removed it. I said, ask Derek. Her face hardened through the tears. Audrey said, you're punishing me with my future. I said, no, I'm letting you write it yourself. I got in and drove away, through the rearview mirror. She stood in the rain beside Derek's empty parking spot. The state innovation contest made everything worse for them. Before the breakup, Audrey had been listed as my presentation partner because Mr. Grant insisted that she gave our project public-facing polish. She had not built the low-cost water filtration prototype. She had not tested the sensor. She had not written the code. She had held the poster board in one practice session and told me the title sounded too blue-collar. After I let her go, I emailed Ms. Harper and asked to correct the team record. Audrey was removed from the project roster. She found out in Mr. Grant's office and stormed into the lab during 7th period. Derek followed her. Ms. Harper was at the front table checking equipment. Audrey pointed at me. Audrey snapped, you cut me off the project. I adjusted the tube valve on the prototype. I said, you did not work on it. Audrey said, I helped present it. I said, you criticized the title. Mike leaned over from the parts table. Mike said, powerful contribution, maybe put that on a resume. Audrey ignored him. Derek picked up one of my sensor modules without asking. Derek said, looks like junk anyway. I held out my hand. I said, put it down. He turned it over. Derek said, what, afraid I'll steal your little garage toy? Ms. Harper stepped closer. Ms. Harper said, Derek, return the module. He tossed it onto the table. It bounced once. I checked it. The casing had cracked. The lab went quiet. Derek shrugged. Derek said, accident. I lifted the cracked casing toward the lab camera. I said, Derek Walsh damaged prototype sensor B at 2:46 p.m. in Ms. Harper's lab. Derek's face darkened. Derek said, you record everything like a freak. I said, only around people who call accidents after they break things. Audrey looked between us. Audrey said, you're making this impossible. Ms. Harper turned to her. Ms. Harper said, Audrey, if you did not contribute to the build, you cannot remain listed as a project member. Audrey said, but it was part of my application. Ms. Harper said, that is not a contribution. Derek laughed bitterly. Come on, Audrey, we'll build our own. Mike whispered, with what, aggression and daddy money? Derek pointed at him. Ms. Harper said, out, both of you. Derek grabbed Audrey's arm and pulled her toward the door. She looked back at the cracked sensor. Not at me, at the project she had lost. 2 days later, Audrey and Derek submitted a new project for the district showcase. The title sounded expensive, Youth-Led Clean Water Equity Platform. The diagram looked familiar, too familiar. Mike found the file on the shared student showcase folder and sent it to me with 14 fire emojis. They had copied my old version from September, the one with the flawed pressure valve and overheating pump. I had replaced that design months ago. Audrey had an old PDF because I had once sent it to her for visual feedback. Derek had probably hired someone to make the poster cleaner. I did not report it immediately. I filed my version logs. I printed timestamps. I asked Ms. Harper to verify the current build date. She looked at the copied diagram, then at me. Ms. Harper said, you know this will fail. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, do not sabotage them. I said, I don't need to. She nodded once. That is usually the best kind of evidence. The district showcase took place in the community college gym, folding tables, banners, judges, parents, students pretending not to panic. Audrey wore a navy blazer and stood beside Derek at a glossy board with stock photos of clean water and smiling children. Their prototype sat under a clear cover like a museum piece. Mine sat on my table with scratches, labels, replacement parts, and test logs. Dad helped unload it before work. Mom brought sandwiches. Mike wore a name tag that said Logistics, because he made it himself. Audrey walked past my table before judging. Audrey said quietly, "You could have let me stay on your team." I tightened a hose clamp. I said, "You left the team at lunch." Derek came up beside her. Derek said, "Don't talk to him, he needs attention." Mike looked at their covered prototype. Mike said, "Is that why yours is wearing a sneeze guard?" Derek said, "It's called presentation." Mike said, "It's called hiding." Judges reached their table first. Audrey spoke beautifully. She talked about access, community, fairness, hope. Derek stood with his hands in his pockets and nodded like a man who had purchased confidence. Judge Patel asked, "Can you run the unit?" Audrey looked at Derek. Derek removed the cover and flipped the switch. The pump started. Water moved through the first tube, then slowed. The pressure valve clicked hard. The motor whined. I heard the old problem before the smoke. Judge Patel leaned in. "Is it supposed to pulse like that?" Derek slapped the side. Audrey whispered, "Don't." The pump coughed, spat water onto the poster, and died. The gym made that awful collective sound people make when something expensive fails in public. Mike whispered at my table, "Thoughts and prayers to the equity platform." Judge Patel looked at their diagram. Judge Patel said, "This pressure layout is unstable. Do you have development logs?" Audrey handed him a folder. He opened it. 3 pages. No tests older than 4 days. Judge Patel looked across the aisle at my table, where my logs filled 2 binders. He asked Audrey, "Who designed this valve sequence?" Audrey said, "We did." I raised my hand from my table. MS. Harper closed her eyes for half a second. Judge Patel turned. I said, "That valve sequence is from my September prototype. It failed in testing and was replaced." Derek snapped, "He's lying." I picked up my binder and walked over. I placed it on the judge's table. I said, "Version logs, September 12th, same diagram, same flaw, same overheating result." Audrey had access to the PDF before she left my project roster. Audrey's lips parted. Derek shoved the dead pump back. Derek said, "Lots of people use similar layouts." I pointed at a typo on their diagram. "You copied my typo too." Filtration, missing the T. Mike shouted from my table, "Classic filtration." The judge looked at the poster. The typo sat there in blue letters. The silence was painful. Audrey whispered, "I didn't know that was his old version." Derek turned on her. Derek hissed, "Shut up." Judge Patel removed their scoring sheet. Judge Patel said, "This entry is under review." My presentation came 20 minutes later. I ran the updated system, clean flow, stable pressure, replaceable parts, clear cost sheet, full logs. Judge Patel asked, "Why did you change the valve sequence?" I said, "Because the September version failed exactly the way that one did." A few judges laughed. I won district and advanced to state. Audrey and Derek were disqualified pending plagiarism review. On the way out, Audrey stood near the doors, mascara smudged, blazer damp from spilled water. Audrey said, "You knew it would fail." I said, "So did the logs." Derek shoved past her and said, "This isn't over." Mike looked at the dead prototype in Derek's hands. Mike said, "Looks pretty over." After the showcase, Audrey's perfect image cracked open. The school forum replayed everything. Her leaving me for Derek was old gossip. The failed project was new blood. Someone posted the side-by-side diagram with the typo circled. Someone else posted Audrey's old claim that she co-led Ethan's clean water project. Mike posted nothing for once, which meant he had already sent everything to the official review instead. Audrey tried to save herself with a long post. She wrote, "I trusted someone who told me the design was original. I am hurt, embarrassed, and learning." She did not name Derek. She did not name me. She did not name the old PDF. Derek replied with a single angry line, "Don't blame me for your exes obsession." Audrey deleted the post 8 minutes later. That night, she called me from an unknown number. I let it ring once, then answered because Mike was sitting at my kitchen table and mouthed, "Evidence." I put it on speaker. Audrey's voice came through small and shaky. Audrey said, "Ethan, please don't send the plagiarism file to the colleges." I said, "The district review already has it." Audrey said, "But you can say it was a misunderstanding." I said, "It was a copied old file." Audrey said, "Derek said you wouldn't care after you let me go." Mike covered his mouth and scribbled on a napkin. She confessed Derek's source. I said, "Derek says a lot." Audrey's voice broke. Audrey said, "I chose wrong." I said, "Yes." She waited. I gave her nothing else, Audrey whispered. You used to comfort me, I said. You used to tell the truth less often. She cried softly, Audrey said. I don't know how to fix my applications, I said. Start by writing them yourself, she hung up. Mom, standing by the stove, looked at me. Mom said, that was hard, I said. Yes, ma'am. Dad, reading the newspaper at the counter, said, hard is not wrong. The next morning, Derek cornered me near the parking lot. His suspension had ended, but the athletic department had benched him pending conduct review. He looked less like a king without the jersey. Derek said, my father wants a meeting. I kept walking. I said, he can email the school. Derek grabbed my backpack strap. I stopped and turned slowly. Mike appeared from behind a truck. Phone up. Mike said, backpack contact. Very cinematic. Derek released it. Derek said, you're messing with college offers. Miller, mine, Audrey's, everyone's. I said, you damaged a lab sensor, shoved me, copied my project, and threatened me. I'm not messing with your offers. I'm documenting your resume. Derek's face twisted. Derek said, you think state judges care about your sob story? I said, no, they care that my prototype works. He stepped close. Derek said, you better lose. I looked at him. I said, you first. He raised his hand like he might swing. Coach Daniels shouted from across the lot, Walsh. Derek froze again. Coach walked over. Coach said, you want to lose the rest of the season too? Derek lowered his hand. Mike whispered, man, consequences keep finding him like GPS. Coach pointed Derek toward the gym. I went to class. State finals happened 3 weeks later. By then, Audrey and Derek had turned on each other in public twice. Once in the hallway when Derek called her dead weight with followers, and she screamed that he had copied the wrong file. Once outside Mr. Grant's office when she begged him to fix her recommendation and he told her his father's lawyer said not to talk to her. Audrey's friends drifted away. Derek's teammates kept distance because scouts were watching his conduct record. Mr. Grant tried to pull me into his office 2 days before state MS. Harper insisted on sitting in. Mr. Grant folded his hands and said, Ethan, you have won the district event and preserved your record. At this point, continuing to press Derek and Audrey may look vindictive. I said, I am not pressing them, I am submitting required documentation. Mr. Grant said, colleges appreciate maturity. MS. Harper said, they also appreciate accurate records. Mr. Grant looked at her. Mr. Grant said, you have been unusually involved. MS. Harper replied, someone had to be. I pulled out the email Mr. Grant had sent the showcase committee before district, recommending Derek and Audrey's project for special attention before judging. I placed it on his desk. I said, you endorsed a copied project before review. Mr. Grant's face went pale. Mr. Grant said, that was a courtesy note. I said, I'm adding it to the file. He leaned back and said nothing else. State was clean. No Derek. No Audrey. No staged drama. Just tables, judges, questions, and work. My prototype ran through every test. Pressure stable, flow clean, cost low, repair simple. Judge Patel was there again. He asked, what was the biggest change from your failed September version? I said, I stopped trying to make the design look impressive and made it easier to fix. He nodded. Good engineering. I placed second statewide and earned a national finalist invitation, plus a university engineering scholarship interview, when Principal Marsh announced it Monday morning. The school applauded. Some students meant it, some followed the sound. Mike stood on a bench and bowed until Cole told him to get down. Audrey stood near the attendance office, watching the announcement screen. Derek was beside her but not touching her. She said something to him. He snapped back. She walked away. That was the last day they looked like a couple. The final crash came at senior awards night. Audrey had been removed from honor speaker consideration. Derek's athletic recommendation was paused after the conduct file reached his recruiting contacts. Mr. Grant was under district review for recommendation bias. I was scheduled to receive the Engineering Achievement Award and scholarship finalist recognition. The gym was full. Parents, banners, folding chairs, squeaky microphone. Mom wore her blue dress. Dad wore his button-down shirt that he said made him look like a manager at a tire shop. Mike's mother sat behind them with a camera. Audrey sat near the back with her mother. Derek sat on the aisle with his father, arms crossed. Principal Marsh gave the opening remarks. Then MS. Harper called my name, Ethan Miller, for outstanding applied engineering work and National Scholar finalist standing. I walked across the stage, the applause came strong, Dad stood, Mom cried, Mike shouted, wish them happiness. Ethan. The gym laughed because by then everyone knew the lunchroom line. I took the certificate, MS. Harper shook my hand and said quietly, you let go and kept moving. I said, yes, ma'am. As I stepped down, Derek stood. Derek said loudly, everybody loves a victim story. The gym went silent. Mr. Walsh grabbed his sleeve, Derek pulled away, Derek shouted, he lost his girl, cried to teachers, got everyone punished, and now you clap like he's some hero. Audrey stood too, but not beside him. Audrey said sharply, sit down, Derek. He turned on her. Derek snapped, shut up, you started this. Audrey's face went white. She said, you threw his bracelet. You copied his file, you shoved him, you ruined my application. Derek laughed, you came to me because you wanted status, don't act pure now. Audrey slapped him, the sound cracked through the gym, phones rose instantly. Officer Lane, present for event security because the district had learned, stepped into the aisle. Principal Marsh said into the microphone, Derek Walsh, Audrey Hart, leave the gym. Derek pointed at me. Derek shouted, this is your fault. I looked at him from the foot of the stage. I said, I wished you happiness, you handled the rest. The line landed like a door closing. Derek's father dragged him toward the exit. Audrey's mother led her out the other side. Nobody laughed at Audrey this time. Nobody needed to. She had chosen the storm and complained about the rain. The next morning, Derek's father withdrew him from the final week of school events. Audrey sent one public apology to the senior group chat. It said, I hurt someone who helped me. I made selfish choices, I'm sorry. Mike read it aloud in the parking lot and said, character development, late submission. I did not reply. Some messages do not need answers. Graduation morning came bright, warm, and loud. The football field was lined with chairs. Blue gowns moved in nervous clusters. Parents waved programs. Teachers tried to organize students who had already stopped listening. I stood in line with Mike behind me. He had written, wish you happiness, on the inside of his cap where only I could see it. I said, you're impossible, Mike said, and yet loyal. Audrey was in line, but without honor cords. She held her diploma card with both hands and kept her eyes forward. Derek was not there. Mr. Grant was not on the faculty row. MS. Harper was. Principal Marsh spoke about choices. She said, some choices cost us immediately, some save us slowly. The hardest part of growing up is knowing which is which. Mike whispered, she's talking about you. I said, she's talking about everybody. Names began. Students crossed the stage. Families cheered. When Audrey's name was called, the applause was polite and thin. She crossed quickly, took the diploma cover, and returned to her seat without looking left or right. When my name came, the applause rose before I reached the first step. Ethan Miller. Mom stood up. Dad stood beside her. Mike's mother shouted my name too. I crossed the stage and shook Principal Marsh's hand. She said quietly, in good standing, congratulations. That phrase mattered more than the applause. In good standing, no suspension, no fight record, no lost scholarship, no destroyed future over a cafeteria trap. MS. Harper hugged me at the bottom of the stairs. MS. Harper said, go build something that works. I said, yes, ma'am. After the ceremony, a local reporter from the district showcase stopped me near the fence. Reporter asked, Ethan, people have been talking about your senior year, the breakup, the cafeteria scene, the project controversy, the scholarship. What changed for you? I held my diploma in one hand and my scholarship folder in the other. Mike hovered behind the reporter until his mother pulled him away by the sleeve. I said, I stopped fighting for people who wanted me damaged. Reporter asked, what about the moment Derek Walsh publicly took your girlfriend? I looked across the field. Audrey stood by her mother's car. No cameras, no Derek, no crowd. She glanced over once, then looked down at her diploma envelope. I said, he didn't take anything I still needed. The reporter asked, and your words that day, wish you happiness, did you mean them? I said, yes, I just didn't mean I would pay for it. That clip traveled farther than the cafeteria video. Some people called it cold, some called it mature. Mike called it the cleanest verbal knockout of graduation week. That evening, Mom taped my scholarship confirmation beside my diploma photo on the fridge. Dad fixed the porch step and said, college boys need stable exits. Mike came over with a grocery store cake that said, "Wish you happiness," with one P missing. He said the bakery understood the spirit. We ate it anyway. A week later, my national finalist packet arrived. Audrey's top choice school moved her application to regular review with no counselor endorsement. Derek's athletic offer disappeared from his social media bio. Mr. Grant resigned before the district finished its personnel review. The senior forum moved on to summer jobs and dorm lists. The lunchroom scene became a joke, then a quote, then old news. But for me, it stayed simple. In one life, I fought the school bully for a girl who watched me fall. In this one, I let go, said, "Wish you happiness," and walked away with my hands clean, my name clear, and my future still mine.